Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EUPATI Alumni webinar about EMA and patient engagement. My name is Zhana Popova, and I'm the EUPATI Content Development Coordinator. Today, I'm happy to moderate this webinar and to discuss together the different aspects of meaningful patient engagement in EMA. Patient engagement in the regulatory and at the European Medicine Agency in particular is a key element of the EUPATI Patient Expert Training Program. Recently, you as EUPATI Fellows have requested to build on this knowledge and dive deeper into the topic. Taking into consideration the fast-evolving patient engagement field, this session, organized by EUPATI in cooperation with EMA, will focus on the practical side of how patients can be involved in EMA. At the same time, it will provide opportunities for open discussions with EMA representative and a fellow who has experience in engaging in EMA activities. The main purpose of this webinar is to present the different ways to cooperate with EMA, to promote a clear understanding of the opportunities for patient engagement in EMA activities, and to discuss together examples of successful patient engagement. But before we start, we would like to briefly introduce a few housekeeping rules. The first thing that we would like to focus on is that all microphones will be in mute. This webinar is going to be recorded and uploaded to the EUPATI YouTube channel with the secured access only to EUPATI Fellows. We also would like to ask you to please use the Q&A box for your questions and the chat box only for your comments. Please ask your questions to the panelists in the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand from the button below during the Q&A session, and we are going to unmute you and give you the floor to ask your questions. We will try to answer all your questions, but if we don't have time to cover everything, we will monitor the chat and integrate your questions into the general outcomes. Also, we would like to share that you can upload a question if you have the same in mind. There is no need for repetition, and you have unlimited options to upload questions. And finally, we would like to encourage you to ask your questions and to share your feedback. Let's make this webinar interesting and engaging together, and please be active. And now, without wasting more time, it is our great pleasure to introduce our wonderful speakers today. These are Kaisa Imonen, Patient Liaison at EMA, and Marco Koreniak, ELPA President, Patient Expert, and EUPATI Fellow. Welcome to our wonderful speakers. It is really great pleasure to have you both here today. And this is the agenda for the webinar today and the order of appearance of the speakers. And now we would like to introduce Kaisa in a little bit more details. Kaisa joined the stakeholders and public engagement team of the European Medicine Agency in 2023, and she supports the agency interaction with patients, consumers, and healthcare professionals and their organizations. She has extensive experience in EU health policy and patient involvement. From 2010 until 2023, Kaisa was Director of Policy at the European Patients Forum, and in that capacity co-chaired the EMA Patients and Consumers Working Party in 2016-2022. She also contributed to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development work on quality and safety of healthcare, and also on the Paris Patient Service work of the WHO European Regional Office on People-Centered Health Systems, as well as numerous European-level projects, working groups, and networks on health policy. She also has a master's in health policy management and innovation from Maastricht University and a master's in international relations from the University of Canterbury. Kaisa, welcome. It is really great pleasure to have you today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jana, and thank you to EUPATI for inviting me. I'm going to come a little bit closer to my laptop, and I hope you can hear me well. I don't think I have to say anything more about this, since you already introduced me very comprehensively. Maybe a small correction to my bio, which is my fault because I sent you a slightly outdated bio. I am no longer working on healthcare professionals at EMA. I am actually 100% dedicated to patient and consumer involvement, which is really close to my heart anyway, so I'm very happy about that. So I'm going to give you a presentation that will be an overview of how EMA works with patients. And I will go through the starting section a little bit quickly because I think the meat of the matter will come a little bit later in the presentation. However, you will get these slides as it was pointed out to you, and you can certainly look at them later. And I'll try to pause after each section and ask if anyone has any questions or clarifications. And then, of course, we can have more of a discussion towards the end. So without further ado, could I have the first slide, please? Okay, so, and go ahead, next, please. So to start with, I would like to clarify a couple of things about the European Medicines Agency. What it is, I want to create the understanding that the EMA is not just a building here in Amsterdam where a lot of us work. There are almost 900 people working at the European Medicines Agency, but in fact, it is a network. It is a network of national regulatory authorities, and they work through their own experts. And then, of course, the European Medicines Agency staff here in Amsterdam. The European Commission is also part of this network. And then a pool of several thousands of experts, including civil society experts, who are involved in many aspects of the agency's work. Next, please. So the main mission of the agency is to protect public health, that is human and animal health. And of course, you will be familiar with the fact that the EMA evaluates applications for bringing medicines to the market. But there are also many activities to facilitate innovation and medicines development. For example, by providing guidance, the EMA produces a lot of guidance to medicines developers every year. We have special programs for developing specific diseases like medicines for children and for rare diseases, the orphan designation program. We have things like the innovation task force and other initiatives that work with academia and so on. And of course, then there is the safety monitoring of medicines. And this is a very important part, which I won't talk about today. And finally, provision of information that is reliable and trustworthy. Next, please. I'd also like to say what the EMA does not do, because sometimes there are misunderstandings about this. The EMA does not conduct clinical trials and does not authorize clinical trials. The EMA also does not get involved into access to medicines in the sense of pricing, reimbursement, or availability, which are national matters. The EMA also does not get involved in intellectual property or advertising matters, and does not regulate homeopathic products, cosmetics, or food supplements. We also don't develop treatment guidelines or provide medical advice. Next, please. There are, of course, benefits to having a centralized system for medicines approval and other aspects that EMA works on. I think that this is probably clear to everybody that when a medicine is authorized, it's authorized in all EU countries at the same time. Of course, you will be aware that there are other hurdles to making it ultimately available to patients, which is not in the scope of EMA's work, but at least the authorization is central, and so is the safety monitoring, and that's very important. The product information as well is coming in all EU languages at the same time and is coordinated. And then we have this huge network of experts that we can draw upon. So I want to go into an explanation of how EMA works with patients. But before I do, is there anything here that isn't clear?
Yeah, I think for now there are no questions, so please go ahead.
Okay, so let's see how EMA works with patients then. I'll give you first an overview and then we'll go into more detail. So next, please. And next, please. So I think it's important to know that EMA's work with patients is not recent. It started, in fact, immediately almost after the EMA was created as an agency in 1995. And here the patient communities from the HIV/AIDS community and then rare diseases were really the drivers. Pretty soon after the EMA was set up, they knocked on the door and said, guys, you have to talk to us. And then a dialogue was initiated, and then this has evolved over the years to become more structural, more embedded, and more systematic. So you can see that, for example, patients have been members of EMA scientific committees since 2000, when the Orphan Medicines Regulation established the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products. And then this was followed by the Committees for Pediatrics, Advanced Therapies, and in 2012, the PRAC, which Marco will talk about a bit in more detail. And then we have also created the Patient and Consumer Working Party. And actually that model was then applied later to healthcare professionals as well, which we won't talk about today. And there have been progressive developments, such as also public hearings introduced by the pharmacovigilance legislation. And during the COVID pandemic, there was more involvement of civil society and of patients also in crisis management activities. And we are looking forward to develop this further as well with a new initiative on patient experience data, which I will mention later again. Next, please. I think, so it's important to know that patients can be represented in the EMA in different ways. We have three categories of patient participation. The most high level, let's say, which is really the management board and the members of scientific committees, is where patients are representing their community, their entire community. So in a way, all patients. And these members are identified through public calls for interest, and they are nominated by the European Commission in these roles. Then the second tier is where patients represent their organizations. And this is where, for example, we have the Patients and Consumers Working Party, where it's the organizations that are members, not the individual persons. And we also have multi-stakeholder workshops, various consultations, policies and guidelines and so on. And here we invite inputs from organizations. And then we have this big chunk of work that relates to individual medicines, evaluation and related aspects. And here patients are involved as individual experts. So this is everything about scientific advice, which I will explain in more detail further on. Scientific committees sometimes consult during the evaluation process. The review of documents also, because it relates to individual product information. So there will be specific criteria for that, and I will explain them later on. Next, please. I just want to show you a very quick, could you press again? I think there's an animation here. Yeah, exactly, thank you. So I just want to show you a little bit about the representing their organization. So you can see here, we have what's called eligible organizations, and we have about 41 at the moment. I think the graph is not completely up to date. And these are organizations that fulfill certain criteria that makes them eligible to work with the EMA. They have to be transparent about their funding. They have to have a clear mission to work for the interest of patients, membership structures, etc. These are all on our website. And then once we have this group, and from amongst them, the Patients and Consumer Working Party members are elected. So the Patients and Consumers Working Party works on a mandate. So every 5 years we renew the mandate, and at that point, organizations can apply to become members. For practical reasons, we cannot have all the eligible organizations in the Working Party. It has 22 members, so I mean it has to remain manageable in size. But we are trying to make the activities more inclusive as well to other eligible organizations. And I already explained about the scientific committees. So next, please. So I want to touch on now how patients are involved in medicines evaluation, and not so much the monitoring part. But before I do that, is there any question about the previous section?
I cannot see anything in the chat or in the Q&A.
We can always return later also to these and can ask questions later.
Of course, and I would like to encourage also the participants to please ask your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to respond to them during the panel discussion or during the presentation.
Certainly. Well. Then let's go on then. Next slide, please. Here you see, this is the kind of standard graph that we always show, but it's a really important one. because it shows that patients are actually involved over the entire, let's say, regulatory life cycle of a medicine. And you can see that this is kind of split into three parts. First being pre-submission, then the evaluation, meaning once companies have submitted their marketing authorization application, and then post-authorization, what happens when a medicine is already on the market. And that is really about the safety monitoring, safety and efficacy monitoring, really. And it's also very important, and it's much bigger than the small part of this graph would indicate, but we are not talking about that today. Today we will focus on pre-submission and evaluation parts. And you can see that patients here are involved in the committees that are doing the evaluations. Up on the top, you see there's always product information that's being reviewed by patients. And then there are also expert meetings at various parts of the evaluation process possible, and also after marketing authorization. Next, please. So pre-submission, as I explained, it means what we do before a company has submitted a formal marketing authorization application. And here there are different companies, different committees that may be involved. For example, the orphan medicines, the COMP, or the pediatric committee, the PDCO, and the CAT, which is advanced therapies. And the most important activity here will be scientific advice. And I will explain scientific advice in more detail, but this is really the main activity, I would say, where experts, including patients, are invited to contribute. And maybe it's better to explain that. So let's go on. Next slide, please. What is scientific advice? Well, you can sometimes see the term scientific advice and protocol assistance and wonder what is the difference between them. Well, essentially they are the same thing. The scientific advice is when a company, while they are still doing their development plans and have not yet submitted, usually when they have not yet submitted marketing authorization to the EMA, they ask EMA for guidance. They might have some questions, and they would like the EMA to give them a view on those questions. And there is a specific working party called Scientific Advice Working Party that will answer these questions. Now, the companies can ask at any stage of the development, but usually they ask before they submit a marketing authorization application. They will provide documentation, so they will provide information about their development plans, and then EMA will discuss this with them, but also bringing in other experts as needed, and often these are patients. And then they will make recommendations to the company on how they should proceed with their development plan, which are not binding at all on the company, so the company can decide whether they follow the advice or not. But there has been some indication in the past that companies who do follow the advice are more likely to be successful with their application. So protocol assistance is essentially the same, but this is for medicines that have an orphan designation. Next, please. I will return to the scientific advice, so you will know a little bit about more in detail. Then once the marketing authorization application is submitted, then the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, which is the CHMP, that's the main evaluating committee, and it consists of member state experts. They will start evaluating the application, and they have a specific timeline that they must do it within. That's defined by law. And you can see the timeline here on the slide. And during the evaluation, there may be different ways of consulting patients. These days, we have a consultation of patient organizations that starts at the very beginning of the process, day one, really. I will tell you about that in a moment. It's called the CHMP Early Contact with Patient Organizations. And then later in the process, there may be consultations of individual patients as experts. For example, you may have a scientific advisory or ad hoc expert group, which I will explain what it is in a moment. There may be oral explanation where a company is meeting with CHMP, and there will be presentations, and patients may be also invited to those. Next, please. So, scientific advice group, which confusingly is very similar by name to scientific advice, but it's not exactly the same, unfortunately. So it's called Scientific Advice Group, the SAG. And these are groups of experts that meet during the evaluation when there are questions. The CHMP has questions or is not fully satisfied with something, and they want additional information, and they request a SAG. It can be the CHMP, it can also be the CAT, the Committee for Advanced Therapies, or if it's a safety-related thing, it can be PRAC. And then the SAGs will discuss the specific questions, and they will answer. And this will help the CHMP decide on the benefit-risk balance of the medicine. And we have actually 5 what's called core SAGs. So these are therapeutic area scientific advice groups in cardiovascular, infectious diseases, neurology, cancer, and vaccines. And when there is no core SAG in existence, then a similar group is convened, an ad hoc expert group. And this is exactly the same. It works exactly on the same principles. And here we can also have patients involved. Next, please. I just want to say a couple of words about the added value of patient engagement, because sometimes there is questions about this. And I mean, certainly it's well recognized by now that patient involvement adds value and that it has an impact. We have several methodologies that we use. A couple of these are the scientific advice, CHMP early contact, SAGs, ad hoc expert groups, oral explanations. We are constantly exploring more ways for engaging patients and for getting patients' perspective. And I would just like to say that the CHMP early contact methodology is a nice example of that, in the sense that it started as a pilot in 2021 only with orphan medicines, and it ran until 2022, and then we did a survey of the rapporteurs, the experts who lead these evaluation procedures. Each one of them is led by 2 people from the national competent authorities, which are called rapporteur and co-rapporteur. So we surveyed the rapporteurs and co-rapporteurs of these procedures that had the CHMP early contact with patient organizations, and they clearly said it was a good thing and it added value to their thought process and to the outcome of the evaluation. So now this is a standard methodology, standard in the sense that for all the procedure evaluation that start every month, we are in touch with CHMP group dedicated to patient involvement, and they identify a number of procedures where they say, here, patient input would be really important, and then we help them get the patient input. So what has happened now is that it's not only orphan medicines anymore, but we do this for all medicines. And also this year, healthcare professional organizations are also involved. So this is a good methodology, and therefore we expand its use. And I think there is a link later in the presentation. There was an article published in 2022 on patient input into scientific advice, which clearly showed that it was an added value, and there are some nice figures there in the article if you read it, and a nice explanation of its added value. So we do try to collect impact. It's hard sometimes because product discussions are confidential, so we cannot publish everything, but it's clear that there is an impact. Let's put it this way, and the fact that patient involvement is expanding into the areas is also proof of that. I'd like to pause here for a moment before I go into scientific advice details. And again, I know this is a lot of information to take in, so if anyone would like to clarify something before we go on.
Actually, there are already a few questions in the chat. One of them is there a link to the study? So if it's possible to provide it. And another question, and of course we're going to cover all the other questions during the panel discussion, but there is a question: how do you determine whether an organization is eligible to represent the patient perspective? Is it enough to be an advocate, or do you need to have patient in governance? And could a research foundation be considered a patient organization?
Okay. Those are good questions, and I think there is a link to the scientific study or the article in the presentation, but if not, I will write it for you in the chat, and I can also send it by email afterwards. And about the eligibility, yes, there are some criteria for that. I didn't go into detail about them. I don't have a slide here about them, but again, I can send you a link to where the criteria can be found online. So basically, I mean, as to your questions, one of the criteria is that the patient organization, in order to be eligible, has to be a patient-focused organization. So what we ask is that the majority of people in the governing bodies, let's say the governing board, a majority of them, or at least half of them, should be patients or patient carers or family members, representing the patients. So if this is basically it, there are historical reasons for this, because there have been a lot of patient organizations in the past where really they were governed by healthcare professionals or others and still claiming to present the patient perspective. And I think at the time when these rules were made, and it's a long time ago now, the goal was to identify those that are genuinely patient-driven organizations. So yes, the membership, the governance question is an important one. Then there's a membership criterion. The organization would need to be either based in the EU or have an office in the EU, or have a membership that covers half of the EU member states. That speaks to the EU focus of the organization. So if it's an organization that's purely active in outside Europe, then it cannot be an eligible EMA organization. It's also a bit to represent the area of people who are actually affected by the regulation. So there's that link as well. And then, as I mentioned, there are some conditions for transparency. It's okay to have industry funding, but it has to be transparently declared, and we have some rules for that. So those are the main factors. Yes, I hope that's clear, but I can certainly link to the full information when I'm in the chat after the presentation. Oh, and I forgot to say they should be European representative organizations. So if it's only one country covering one country, it's not enough. Okay, so maybe let's talk about scientific advice then, because actually in the really interesting survey that Jana made with her colleagues before the webinar, there were a lot of questions on individual patient involvement. And I thought it would be interesting to focus on one process, one procedure, and just show it to you in a bit more detail, and that could enlighten you about what it is about and what happens. So if you could move on to the next slide. We will look at scientific advice, a bit the process and what we expect from patients' involvement here. Next, please. Okay, so I mentioned that companies can ask for scientific advice at any stage that they're developing a product. They can also ask for scientific advice on almost any aspect of their development. So these are usually, we divide them into quality questions, non-clinical questions, which are like animal studies and other things like that, or modeling, clinical questions, and then regulatory procedures, and sometimes when there's a question about significant benefit for orphan medicines. And it's really on the clinical questions that the EMA looks for patient input. So clinical questions can be about clinical trials, study population, inclusion, exclusion criteria, endpoints, and how they are measured. Is the trial pragmatic for patients, etc.? So that's the main area for patients. Next, please. Some of the areas where patients contribute when it comes to the clinical aspects, as I mentioned, whether the endpoints are appropriate from their perspective, the company may select certain endpoints, but it may not be what the patients think are most important endpoints. Also looking at the target population, as I said, exclusion criteria, inclusion criteria, whether that makes sense for the patients looking at with their experience of the condition. A comparator sometimes, whether if they have the right comparator. I'll give you an example of that. Things like pragmatic things about the study. Also whether something is clinically relevant for patients. Often these days we get PRO measures, questions related to PRO measures, and there usually patient input is really important. And of course there may be some questions on other aspects like ethics and others, but usually it's about endpoints and the sort of framing of the trial. Next, please. What happens then? How do we do this? So we work with the scientific advice secretariat in the agency. And there is usually a request for patient representation from their side, but sometimes we also identify a need for patient representation, and then we go to the scientific officer and we say, look, here you have a PRO measure, for example, would you not like a patient perspective? And then they often say, yes, that's a good idea. So what we do then, we identify a patient, and the way we can do this is that we can reach out to a patient organization that's an eligible organization, or even a not eligible organization. Or we can look at who's been previously involved. So we have already some people that we know who have participated in these things. Or we can look at our database where we have registered individuals who have expressed an interest in certain therapeutic areas. So we find someone who is appropriate or possibly appropriate. We contact them. And then if they have not yet been registered as a European expert, they need to do that. And at the same time, they have to submit a declaration of interests, because we have to assess their declaration of interest for any competing interest before they can be involved. And at the same time, they also sign a confidentiality undertaking, because in these procedures, the information is highly confidential and they cannot share it. Then, if everything is clear, we put them in touch with the scientific team who will contact them. They will send them a package of information, what we call a briefing book, which essentially is the information received from the company and the questions the company is asking, and also some views already on what the answers might be. They have to read through these, not all of it, but focusing on the clinical part or the specific questions for patients. And then they can also ask questions. So usually what we do is we organize, this is not our task, but the scientific officer and an assistant who work on the procedure, there's always two people working on each procedure. They will organize a call with the patient, and they will basically talk through the documents and give them an idea of what they should focus on, what questions they'd really like the patient to look at, and also answer any questions if the patient is unsure, or they can support in this way. And also tell them what they don't need to look at, because sometimes you get a package of information that's 100 pages long, and obviously it's a lot, but the patient doesn't need to look at everything. They can, but they don't need to. And then usually the patient will submit their comments in writing. The deadline for this can be very short, can be a little bit longer, depending. And this feeds into what is called a joint report. So the patient's input will be included in the report. Sometimes there is a meeting with the company if the scientific advice working party, when they discuss the joint report, they feel that they need to meet with the company. Usually these are virtual these days, and then the patient is also invited to participate in that meeting. And after the process is concluded, every patient receives a copy of the final advice that is sent to the company, or the meeting minutes, which they can also review and comment on at that point. And they also receive a survey to ask them how was the experience for them and how could we improve this, and obviously a letter of thanks. So Next, please. I will explain a bit about the documents. So every expert receives the same information. I already talked about the package or the briefing book. Unfortunately, currently there are no lay summaries of this available. This is something that we would like to see in future, so it's something that we are trying to develop. It's obviously it would be the companies who would have to do this. Also, all the documents are in English and all the meetings are in English, and for that reason, one of the things the patient has to have is a good command of English. But this is how we work, unfortunately. And so everything else, the scientific officer and us, if needed, will help, will answer questions, and will guide. We can also go through the documents together. Sometimes we've done that for patients who felt that they wanted to do that to understand better what they needed to look at. And phone calls indeed can be organized and usually are organized. I want to give you a couple of examples and then I'll pause it again for questions. So if we go to the next, please. So just to give you an idea of how patients can contribute in these cases. The first example is about a rare disease where the patient representative who was involved was able to collect information about the treatment for this condition, a rare epilepsy. The company was basically saying that a certain already authorized product was not really used in Europe, so they didn't choose that product as a comparator for their product. But the patient said, no, actually, I can provide data that this product is used, and they were able to mobilize their community and survey them quickly. And they were able to provide confirmation that actually this product that was already authorized was used in about 40% of all cases, and therefore it should be selected as a comparator. So they were able to counter the company's arguments, and in the end, the scientific working party did recommend to the company to use that product as a comparator in their clinical trials. Next, please. The second example comes from another rare conditions, and here it was about inclusion-exclusion criteria. So the patient expert, with his experience of this disease and group of diseases, was able to give information on the exclusion criteria and inclusion criteria about the age of the patient that should be included. And they were able to do this because they had a global view. They had contact with the patient community, and they were able to tell the scientific advice team about the needs of all the patients, as well as an understanding of the treatments that were already there. So this is more about bringing precision to the trial conditions and making sure that the trial is targeting the right group of patients, if you understand what I mean. So these are things that the company may know or may not know. Sometimes they may consciously ignore some knowledge for reasons of their own. The scientific advice team may not know, but when the patient comes in, they can bring in aspects that the scientific experts do not necessarily consider. So I hope that shows you, and let me show this first slide, this last slide of the section before we go into questions, because I just want to show you an overview again. Maybe it's a little bit hard to read here, but just of the areas where patients have given input to scientific advice. You can see that the trial population and endpoints are almost in half the cases there, and also quality of life, a lot of comments on the quality of life and feasibility study, as well as the standard of care and choice of comparator. And certainly they offer real life experience, and sometimes they raise issues that have not previously been considered. And you can see here that patients' input resulted in further reflection in a little bit over half of the cases, and in 20%, so 1 in 5, the recommendations to the company were changed based on the patient input. This may not sound like a lot, but I think it's important also to bear in mind that in the great majority of the cases, the patient agreed with what the company was proposing. So in a way, there is no change, but that doesn't mean there's no impact. The patient here actually helped to validate the proposed development plan. So I hope that shows you a little bit about scientific advice. Again, I know it's a lot, so if you have clarificatory questions, right, I'd be happy to answer them if I can.
Thank you, Kaiser. Indeed, there are some questions, not so much about the scientific advice, but more related to, can you share more information about the EMA's patient experience data initiative?
Okay, I shall come back to that at the end, and if I forget, please remind me.
Of course, and there is another question about how does EMA measure the impact of their patient engagement activities?
Okay, again, well, I can tell you now briefly, but we can also come back to that at the end. So obviously there are various ways. As I said, we cannot always measure everything in very qualitative terms because of the confidentiality aspect, but we publish an annual report with the numbers every year. So you might want to look at those because it also shows that these activities are growing almost every year. It's expanding. So that's impact. We also have surveys to the rapporteurs of these procedures where we ask them their opinion of the patient's input. And of course, we also ask the patients, but we are currently working on improving this feedback tool to make it a bit more informative and help us develop further. So there's those two. And then what else we have? So there's this published article that's very good on scientific advice. I really encourage you to read it, and I will send you the link. And of course, you should also know that patients' input is reflected in the European published assessment reports, the EPAR, because there is already now a section for putting in patient contributions, and we are working on further developing that to make it even more systematic and even more transparent. But again, we could maybe return to this topic at the end if there are further reflections.
Thank you very much.
In that case, I'd like to talk to you about how you can engage with EMA, because that was also one of the questions I think that was expressed a lot in the pre-webinar survey. So as a reminder, now I'm not going to go into how you can become a committee member or management board member, but if you have a question about that later, you can see, and about the eligible organizations. Now, if you are affiliated with an organization or you work for an organization, you can register the organization with EMA. There's a link here you can use. And then you can also look at the eligibility criteria, which I will give you if they're not here on the slide. If you're an individual, I will explain a little bit about how that works. But first of all, you can also register your interest to work with EMA. You can look at this link and you can fill in a form, and then you are registered as an individual with an interest. Or you can just also email us. I mean, this email address here is for public engagement, and basically that's a mailbox for all the civil society engagement team. And if you write to us with questions, we'll always be more than happy to answer you. Next, please. And this is one of the important areas that we need to discuss because here, I mean, obviously, it's important for organizations, but it's also very important for individuals. There are some criteria and there are some transparency requirements. As I explained, to be an eligible organization, there are certain criteria. They are again listed here that an organization has to fulfill to become an eligible organization. And for individuals, which for some of you may be more interesting, is you should understand that patient experts are treated as any other experts. So there is no difference in principle. Everyone is on the same line, and all experts who are involved in EMA activities have to declare their interest and sign this confidentiality undertaking. And I will tell you a little bit about these criteria if you go to the next slide. So individual patient representatives that participate in activities related to specific medicines or product related. First of all, patient here includes also family member, carer. So we have parents for young, pediatric population and so on, or people who cannot represent themselves. But it should ideally be person with lived experience of the condition, and they have to reside in EU, EEA. Unfortunately, the EMA can no longer work with experts based in the UK after Brexit. This is very sad. It made us very sad, and of course, very bad for the patient experts based in the UK. But that's how we are. And of course, then you must register as a European expert and declare your interests. And when we involve you in an activity, we will evaluate your declaration and check that there are no competing interests. As I mentioned, English is the working language. One exception I would mention maybe the residence question, because sometimes people ask, exceptionally, if an individual is nominated by an EU patient organization to represent that organization, then they can be resident in another country outside the EU. However, that's not a very common occurrence. We've had someone from Switzerland, for example, who was representing a European patient organization, so it is possible. And then on the right there, you can see the things that must be declared in the declaration of interests. And maybe, so I can briefly explain about those. Obviously, employment, consultancy or strategic advisory role, or financial interests in a pharmaceutical company or medical device company. Those are the big sort of potential conflicts of interest. I think it's probably unlikely for patient representatives to be principal investigators, but of course it's possible. And then funding to organization does need to be declared as well, and close family member interests. If you're married to someone who owns shares in the company, that needs to be declared. Repurposing of a medicinal product means that you are involved in the process of repurposing a particular medicinal product. And then if there are any other interests or facts, of course, this is where usually people talk about where, like when I was in European Patients Forum, I used to put EPF's, a link to EPF's website where you could find all the information about EPF's funding. I put it there under any other interests or facts. It's just if you are participating in an EU-funded research project or something like that, it can be declared there. And then you have to say if you're a CAT member or an alternate. Just to refresh your memory, this is the Advanced Therapy Committee, and it's actually a requirement in the legislation that any CAT member or an alternate cannot have interest in the biomedical industry. So there is a specific provision for that. On the next page, you will see a little bit more. I will show it to you if you go to the next slide. This you can see online. It will be more legible. You can't really read it here, but you can see that the question of competing interest is sort of a gradual one, so that there are degrees, and sometimes where you see the red with an X, it means the person is blocked entirely from any interaction. And then when there are other colors, then there are various degrees of restriction, more or less. It depends on the role taken by the person and on the nature of the interest. So the two columns that I've kind of framed here with red are the ones that relate to experts participating in committees, which include scientific advice, or SAGs. That's the one on the right. So you can see here, you can't see the whole table and the key, that you can read it through the link, and you can also read the whole policy through the link. But I think what I would encourage you to do, if you are interested in becoming involved with EMA as an individual patient expert, read this carefully and consider especially the consultancy and strategic advice, because there are restrictions, and sometimes patient organizations, patient experts also have some issues with these. We're always happy to answer questions because everything is assessed on a case-by-case basis. But if you are currently in an employment role at the company, or if you have a current consulting role or strategic advice basically means that you have some kind of influence on decision making. Then it is considered strategic advice. Then you cannot participate. This is, I know that it's not something that's very popular with some patient experts, but there's a rationale for why we have these restrictions. And by the way, I want to say also that it doesn't matter whether consultancy or advice to companies is paid or not. Even if it's unpaid, it still counts as consultancy or advice. Okay. Any questions about these aspects?
I can see that there are some questions in the Q&A box, but just to be on time and to have enough time in the end for panel discussion, maybe we could keep them for the panel discussion.
Okay. Let's do that. Yes, I will not take too much time in the last part. It's really rather short. So if we go on, and you can go 2 slides. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that there are various opportunities for capacity building. Obviously, we consider training very fundamental to support patient representatives. And for the individual patient experts who participate, we have this sort of one-to-one support, just talking to us as patient liaisons or to the scientific officers. But we also have more formalized training opportunities. One of these is the EMA annual training day. And this is really for patients representatives who might be participating in things like scientific advice or document review. And it is this goes through patient organizations. So currently, in order to participate, you have to be nominated by an eligible organization. And then we have resources on the website, and I have actually included some links in a further slide down the line. But of course, we are also very pleased to hear suggestions on what additional training or what additional resources would be useful. We recognize that one size doesn't fit all, and sometimes people might want more videos on the website or more infographics or something else that doesn't exist. So I'd be very happy to hear suggestions from you. And about the annual training, I think yeah, if you do have a contact with a patient organization that works with EMA, let them know that you're interested in attending the annual training, and so they can put your name forward when we come to issue the call, which is usually about 6 months before. So this year the annual training will be in December, and it will be virtual. So probably the call will go out a little bit before the summer holidays. I hope we can manage that. And if you can go to the next one. So here I just put a few links for you to look at. I really recommend that you look at the overview of resources and the different informations on involvement, because I realized that just me talking you through things is not going to necessarily be very comprehensive, and it will help you to look at these fact sheets especially, and maybe look at the videos online on EMA's webpage. The EMA basics are also pretty nice, even though some of them refer to EMA being in London, but the content is still good. And I can send you separately the links that we discussed, because I realized they're not here. And with that, I would just finish, and I took a bit of your time, so apologies for that, but I hope it was useful, and I'd be happy to take more questions.
Thank you very much, Kaisa. Thank you for this very interesting and detailed presentation. And we do have questions in the Q&A box, which we will park for now and ask them during the panel discussion. But please also take a look at them and feel free to respond to them, to some of them in typing. And now, without further time, it is our great pleasure to introduce the second and the last speaker for the today webinar, Marco Koreniec. Marco is the president of the European Liver Patient Association, representing 32 liver patient associations from 25 countries, and he's a EUPATI Fellow from Cohort 5. He holds 3 master's degrees in business and economy, international relations and diplomacy, and international patient advocacy, and he also obtained education in pharmacovigilance at the Uppsala Monitoring Center in Sweden. Marco is also a chair of the Patients and Consumers Working Party, a member of the Prague Committee and at EMA, and a member also of the Advisory Forum at the ACDC and HERA. In 2017, the Economist Intelligence Unit named him one of the 18th most influential individuals in hepatitis elimination in the world. Marco, welcome. It is very nice to have you and to present the fellow and EMA perspective today on the webinar. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jana, and thank you for a nice presentation. And thanks, EUPATI, for inviting me to do this part. So when I'm listening to Kaisa, I always learn something new. So she's very systematically clear in the conveying messages, and she usually is approachable for any kind of questions because it's a lot of things to take in. So I will do the second part, which is like closely connected with your decision. So your decision to be part of something at EMA. So next slide, please. So it's going to be like a patient perspective about the involvement in EMA. Kaisa did all the regulative part at what is there and what we can use. But my part was more like, I wanted to be more like from the patient perspective. So you are there now, what can you do? What was the process for me? What was very frustrating? What was easy to do? So this will be the focus of the presentation. Next slide, please. So 4 parts. One, I would like to mention something about why it's important to participate as a patient or a patient representative at EMA. And I will go through very swiftly because you will all get the videos and material, and then you can read all the small print. But we will just remind ourselves why it's so important to be there. Then we will just review again what are the 3 parts where you can collaborate with EMA. And then I will describe parts of the process that I was involved in when I was applying for EMA Prague Committee, and then some ideas on the future of patient participation at EMA. And I will do the comparison between EMA and FDA, because every year we have also a meeting with patient groups from FDA. And it's really interesting to see how the FDA is organized opposed to EMA, and what does this bring to the table at patient participation at EMA. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, so it's enhancing safety and efficacy. So safety being the number one. So if you are a patient and you want to be involved, one thing should be crystal clear. And that's it, that you want to do something for the safety or safe use of medicines that are already there, or you want to have an opinion in regards of the medicine that will be used. So safety is a really big issue in patient participation at EMA. Next slide. Of course, also informed decision-making. So if you put your input in to the decision-making process at EMA, it will be more like wider. Sometimes researchers will also understand the perspective for patients, and they will change some parts of endpoints or their focus. And we saw that on several different procedures that I was part of. Next slide. So of course, fostering trust and transparency. If you engage patients, you will also show what you do. And this is something that EMA is doing very well, at least now. So, and with this, you are like building the trust in the European institutions, in this part, especially EMA. And you are also showing transparency of your procedures. Next slide. Of course, advocacy and empowerment are important for patient representations, because you always represent, if you are a patient, your own health needs, or if you are a patient representative or advocate or someone that is a researcher in the field, you know what patients are like asking, or what is the point that is missing, and you are doing the advocacy for that purposes. Next slide, please. And of course, sometimes even stimulating innovation. If you are talking to the researchers, you sometimes can unveil the part that they were missing, because they are focusing on how to do top-notch level research that will be reproducible, that will be like general, that could be published, that could be like in the scientific form perfect. But this is not always the case for patients, because sometimes you will be more concerned about the endpoints or some points that are not so important for the top-notch scientific publication, but they are hugely important to patients and patient communities. And with this, what EMA is doing, you get the chance to also be there and influence that kind of a decision. Next slide, please. So as you saw with Kaisa, there are 3 possibilities where you can participate. I would strongly recommend that you go to the webpage of EMA and you find a way how to enlist yourself as a patient expert if you have like experience of a disease. I have a rare blood disease, and with that experience, I enroll myself as a patient expert in the EMA database. And this was the first contact I made with EMA. Many years ago, when EMA was based in London, I was invited to be part of the procedure as a patient with experience of the specific drugs. And I didn't know what I was signing to. I didn't know what to do. So every document that they sent me, I read everything. So they said, oh, this chapter number 7 is really important for you as a patient. Just read the chapter number 7, not 1 to 15, but I read everything 1 for 15. So majority of the documents were very well prepared for scientific experts, not for patients. So I struggled a little bit, but then I focused just on my chapters, and I was able to be part of the discussion in person, and I saw the procedure and how did it go on. And when I was asked to state my opinion, I already had an idea what to say and in which part to influence the decision-making process. Of course, if you are a representative of a patient association, you are warmly invited to be part of the observers as patient and consumer working party, and maybe later also part of a membership at patient and consumer working party. And the third part is individual patient, where you are a patient representative of a patient at some committees, and we will just look at the EMA prac committee that I'm part of. Next slide. So to be very practical now, so all the active application processes for positions at EMA are published at the European Commission. And this is the link to the page that you should visit very regularly and see what EMA is searching for, or what Commission is searching for in terms of collaborating at EMA. So, for example, there was an open call in September. I applied to. The applications were until October. And then in the documents, they said that official appointment of the new patient representative at PRAT committee will be 1st of March. And this was not the case, because the first official letter from European Commission to my site was sent only in May. And then I was able to start my work. It took roughly a month to establish all the communication procedures that are needed in order for EMA to know who is who online, because you need to establish your own ID, and you need to be that they know that when you are at the computer that this is you. So so I first started working in the EMA prac committee in June 2022. So if you apply, and sorry. When you apply, please be patient. Be very, very patient. For me, it was 10 months since the application until the really practical work that started like 10 months later. So the last open call for patient and patient representatives was open until 21st of December last year. And it was of patient representatives that would work in the EMA comp committee. But I'm sure that there will be many more calls, even due to new pharma legislation, because one of the committees at EMA has no formal place for patients. And with new pharma legislation, this will change, and we will have at least 4 patient representatives at that committee only. But of course, any other committees are actively searching for patients. So you work for 3 years, and then you can just reapply once, or you don't reapply. And then every 3 years, the people there, or patient representatives, are just changed. Next slide, please. So in regards of the application, I had to send the application form, I had to send the declaration of interest, a CV, and recommendation letter. So just a few words about, I have here pointed out 2 decisions of the European Commission. First one to name me as an alternate, and the second one to name me as a member when the member decided not to be part of the committee anymore. So this is also the thing that can happen. Even if you are not selected as a member or an alternate and you are on the list, you should also expect that, because we have different life paths, and you start there, you finish elsewhere, and you have no time more for committees, and then you can also step down. So this is something that happened last year, and with last year I became the full member of the EMA-PRAC committee, and we just choose alternate from the list that was already made by the European Commission. I just wanted to say something about the declaration of interest. So Kaisa did get in some details of that. If you receive any kind of documents from EMA, please read it. I was so happy to apply that I was not so keen on read everything in regards of declaration of interest. So that's why I did it my way. So like Frank Sinatra, I did it my way, and it was not so right way. So later, when I had problems with the section that is for law at EMA, and it overviews the declarations of interest, we had to exchange several emails just to be clear what I wanted, and if I put some data in the wrong part or no. So everything was clear when I sat down and I read all the documents, and it was a lot of documents. Just for you to know, so when I got a welcome letter to EMA-PRAC committee, I got a document that I was thinking, oh, great, this is finally a short document, just 2 pages. Yes, but it was 2 pages to links to the documents that are important for the working at EMA. And I counted them because I was writing a piece and I wanted to show the number, how many links they sent. And they said 99 links to 99 documents that are important for working at EMA. So you need a little more time also to go over everything. And in regards of recommendation letter, you need that because it's going to be a very huge time constraint if you work in any committee. So you need to be sure that organization that is sending you is also aware that, for example, you will not be available for their work at least 4 or 5 or 6 days per month. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you an insider look of how EMA-PRAC committee works. And I cannot discuss specifics because we are discussing specific drugs that are used in the market, but I can give you an overview, like a bird's view of what is going on. So as you know, pharmacovigilance risk assessment committee is something that is there when the drugs are already on the market, they are like widely used, and we need to make sure that they are still safe. So one of the things that we do is assessing safety signals. You should know that if you experience any kind of reaction, you can report it yourself, like a patient, or your doctor can report it to the National Authority for regulations in regards of medicine. And then they decide if this is hugely important, it will go to EMA. And then after evaluation from the experts of EMA, it will go to the EMA-PRAC committee. So we are deciding on the safety signals that were already discussed on several stages. So probably they are important in regards of safe use of the drug. Of course, we evaluate the risk management plans. So every company who wants to sell drugs on the European Union market, they also need to prepare our risk management plans. But they're usually prepared in the previous phases. So when the drugs are used widely, you need to reassess these risk management plans if they are still in line, and if they are if they adequately address the identified safety risk that they said they will be there, or is there something new? Of course, we are also making recommendations. So recommendations could differ. For example, we can change the product information. We usually discuss the wording on a patient leaflet or wording on the leaflets that are there for medical experts. And if we change something there, a company needs to change all and reprint everything that is inside the medicine. Of course, we can also ask company to do additional safety study. If the adverse reactions are really severe, we can also ask to do additional safety study just to prove that the safety is still manageable and is still the benefits of the drug are more important than the harm that the drug does. Or even we can suspend the drug from the European Union market. I work now here for 1 month and 1 year and 8 months, slowly going to 2 years. And I saw just one suspension of the drug, and we discussed several drugs that were for suspension. Of course, collaboration with experts. Usually we collaborate with internal experts, but also external experts that come to the committee and they explain to the committee what is going on with the drugs and the safety and efficacy of the drug. Of course, preparation for the meeting is very tough. So you will receive, or I will receive, a document which is 100 to 150 pages, roughly 1 week or 10 days prior to the meeting. And in that pages, I have every important information that will be presented in the meeting. The meeting usually lasts for 4 days, starts at 8:30 in the morning and lasts until 7 or 8 at night, with 3 pauses, just 2 for coffee and 1 for lunch. But you will see how many decisions we do take. And in regards of the decision, at the EMA Prague committee, you cannot be without an opinion. Every decision that is made, it is yes or no. You cannot be abstained. So we discuss so long that every member of the committee is for yes or no. And of course, keeping up to date, it is really beneficial if you are reading the stuff, if you are part of some kind of a briefing in regards of the drugs. It is not necessary to be briefed on all the drugs that are used, but it's really good if you are at least briefed at the new development in your field. For example, my field is the field of Willebrand's disease, and I usually go through every paper that is new, that is published, that talks about new advancement and future in the field, so that I can better understand if we are talking about this kind of a procedure, that I better understand where is this coming from. Next slide, please. So, of course, your work at EMA Prague committee depends on if you are an expert or you work as a representative of national organization, or you are a patient organization. But overall, we are doing this. So we review individual case reports and safety study for every single individual drugs that is managed to come all the way up to the discussion at EMA Prague committee. Of course, you will need to attend virtual and in-person meetings, and you will engage in the scientific discussions and debates. So I remember EUPATI training. So we had an evaluation. So we signed in a report on adverse reaction for one drug, and then we had a discussion on the safety of the drug. The workshop lasted 3 to 4 hours, so that everything was clear and everything was good for everybody and everybody knew what was going on. For example, the same procedure, it takes like 15 to 20 minutes at EMA Prague committee. So the speed is huge, and you need to be very good prepared to do like intervention where you want to do the intervention. Of course, this is also together with preparing the draft recommendations and documents, collaborating with colleagues and external experts, and keeping up with the new research. Next slide, please. Of course, you will hear that as a patient representative, is not necessary to have any special skills or knowledge. You just need to be there and try to get in and understand the language and what is going on. But it's hugely beneficial if you apply for a specific committee, that you try to read the minutes, that you try to see what will be helpful. And these are some of the skills and qualities that are helpful if you are working in any committee at EMA. So first is medical and pharmacological expertise. So you can get this at the EUPATI training, you can get this and any other training that is focused on medical and pharmacological knowledge. But more specifically here, it is also important that you are briefed on the things that are important for the patient groups that you represent. Of course, analytical and critical thinking skills, moreover, like when you get the documents, you review the documents and you make a decision where to intervene and why you intervene and how you will intervene. Communication and collaboration skills. When I started to work, I used every coffee break, I used every lunch break to go to different members of a PRAC committee and ask them, where do they see the collaboration with patients, where patients can contribute? And I was also talking about very specific procedures for specific drugs, and I was asking them about their opinion. So communication and being out there is extremely important and very, very helpful. Of course, teamwork and leadership skills. Usually we work in pairs, so I work as a member and I have an alternate. We work together, so also the decisions that are taken at EMA PRAC, there are usually decisions where we have one voice, but we decide at the beginning what this voice is going to be, yes or no. Ability to work under pressure and meet the deadlines. This is a huge one because in these 4 days, you will see the final report of the last meeting that we had in February, what was also discussed. And then, of course, you have a commitment to public health and patient safety. And I guess, I don't know, with me, my disease is there 24 hours a day, so I cannot get rid of it. I cannot get away with it. So I guess I'm always there, always thinking about also safety of the medicine that I use. Next slide, please. So, for example, this is a report, very short, that is published on official EMA webpage. On the left side, you have a small document, 14 pages of all the abbreviations that are used in the committee discussions. So on my first day, I didn't understand a bit. It was like just jumping on Venus or Mars, and they're speaking something that I cannot understand. I speak some languages, but this is something I could not understand. So it was very beneficial for me to have these abbreviations and to go and to know the dress is not a dress, it's something else. And then psura and everything that is discussed in abbreviations. So it's good to go through that. And in regards of the last meeting from the February 2024, so we discussed 8 safety signals, 65 periodic safety update reports, 46 risk management plans, 21 post-authorization safety studies, and 1 referral. So all this was done in these 4 days. That's why we cannot lose time in order to go deeply into discussions about specific drugs. We can do that, but we can do that in another committee. So I'm invited also to the EMA PRISMA committee, where we take the most problematic drugs and problematic adverse events that we encounter, and then we discuss it more, how to behave to increase the safety of the drug. Next slide, please. So I have some ideas on the future trends of EMA. Of course, these are just my opinion. It's not opinion of EMA, it's not opinion of the PRAC committee, but just my views of what can happen in the future. I will go through very quickly in order to save some time for questions at the end. But just like, you know, I think that there are increased opportunities for patient participation. There are increased opportunities now, and in the future, we will see even more of that. So there are several pilots and several initiatives that EMA is doing. I just listed one, but there are several different that you can encounter. And EMA is focused on specific disease areas. So usually these are rare diseases and serious diseases. But in the future, I think that it will deepen this pool and maybe add also something to that. Next slide, please. So I compare this to FDA, so American Association, so regulatory authority. So if you look at their structure, you see that they already established a patient engagement framework. It works a little bit different than at EMA because it's like developed very separately. So in EMA, you have the feeling that you are part of the process and you are involved into the process. But at FDA, of course, I have just the information I got from the patient representatives that work at FDA. It is sometimes like a separate procedure for like a patient-centric drug development procedure where you just come in and participate in several points. Of course, they focus on diverse representation. They do not focus just on rare diseases, but they try to cover everything. And I think this is also due to the number of people that are employed in FDA in comparison to EMA. So FDA is huge. In regards of the emphasis on the regular tools, so they develop a patient-focused drug development meetings, and they have patient engagement plans. So they have developed some of the things that also came up out of the discussion with EMA. Next slide, please. So if you compare EMA and FDA, so joint trends for the future are, so there is a growing recognition of patient value. So today and in the future, patient voices, patient opinions will be needed. In order to make this as hugely impacted as we can, we need to know more about the procedures, about the medical knowledge or pharmacological knowledge in order to make the impact where it fits the most. Of course, both agencies will focus more on real-world data. So real-world evidence and patient-reported outcomes are two basic things today. And of course, they also work all the time on the promotion of transparency and communication with different stakeholders and different parties. Next slide, please. New pharma legislation that is in European Union. So we can see that there is enhanced data capture and analysis. And I just pointed out this again. So real world data and patient reported outcomes are getting more and more important, and they're getting more into the spotlight. So in the future, we can see more engagement with patients and patient communities. Of course, also expanded patient representations. So we can see that. And then artificial intelligence. We are speaking a lot of how to use artificial intelligence. I can speak only for the Pharmacovigilance Committee, where we were discussing how AI-powered tools can be used for assessing the signals. And this is important because the number of reports that EMA got, for example, in 2019, it was around 150,000 reports from the whole EU. But in the year 2020, when the COVID was there was 780,000 reports. And if you need a bunch of people to analyze every report in order to get the sense where the important things are or not. So this was also the thing that inspired the discussion about using the artificial intelligence in the pharmacovigilance part. Of course, we will see expansion of digital tools and platforms. This is something that is good from the COVID era, that we just learn how to use the technology more. Next slide, please. So we can see in the new pharma legislation that we are trying to set the minimum standard for patient engagement. And this is important because it will be staying there. It will not be like ad hoc, or do we have or do we not have patients. It will be a minimum standard of where to put the patient voice into the process. Of course, we can see also the focus on personalized medicine. With personal medicine, the real-world data and patient-reported outcomes will be very important and will come very in handy. Of course, focus is also on transparency and accessibility in forms of understanding the clinical trial data, understanding the procedures. And of course, also ethical considerations, mostly in regards of data privacy or conflicts of interest of all the parties that are working with EMA. And of course, ensuring that all voices are heard fairly. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, just one slide of who I am, but this was already mentioned by Jana. Thank you very much at the beginning of the session. So next slide, please. So this is the European Liver Patient Association I lead. We are now 32 members from 25 different countries. We have several different teams working on different liver diseases because we are focused on liver diseases. We are part of 20 Horizon Europe projects, which together account for roughly 200 million euros that are spent for liver research, where we collaborate with around 180 research labs, collaborators, principal investigators from the European Union, and some research labs from the US. Next slide, please. These are some of the logos of the projects. Next slide, please. Some of our members and their activities at the ground. We try to be more at the ground as we can, because then you are in contact with the patient communities and you can make better impact at EMA because you know where the problems are and where are the concerns. Next slide. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much. I will be here for any possible questions.
Thank you very much, Marko. Thank you for sharing your personal perspective, and apologize also that we have a limited time for Q&A, but now we actually would like to hear from you, the audience. We still have a few minutes for some questions from your side, although we are very close to the end of the webinar, and we can see that in the chat there are already 2 questions related to your presentations. So the first one, I think, Marko, maybe you could jump in here. It is from anonymous attendee that is just surprised by the 99 links now that is really something important and something challenging. And the comment is that people lead busy lives, plus how does accommodate for people with certain types of disability? Can you please provide further information to that?
So yes, as I said at the beginning, it's very time consuming to go through everything. So of course, from these 99 links, not everything was important for working at EMA Prague committee, but in some stages later, it was important just to consult them and to see what is written there. So basically, it's not like reading everything at once, but you need to be very smart how to put it in the small sections or chunks that you can go through.
Thank you very much. And there is more like a comment, maybe Kaisa, you could address it here, that organizations that could be represented, like the groups formed by AIDS Parkinson Worldwide has formed PD Avengers, and they're setting out a research policy for information to patients and carers. So is this something that maybe could be represented? I'm not sure if this is a question or more like a comment.
Shana, if I may say, so I think it was a comment when somebody asked which patient organization, I think it was from Christine, could be, how you say that, not entitled, but to be a part of work with EMA.
Hey, but maybe I can, because there's something else that comes to my mind as I was reading this. If I may just, it could be interesting for the audience, because sometimes patient organizations and patient groups, patient networks send us information, because patient groups collect data, and sometimes they do research, and sometimes they send it to the EMA, and we're always happy to receive such information. There's something within an evaluation procedure called a third-party intervention, which I can't go into now because I'm not an expert in that. But if it doesn't fall within a specific evaluation, it could still be interesting data, and we would always pass that on internally to relevant colleagues. And one of the things I really wanted to maybe also say is that for the EMA to influence things, data is what we want, not lobbying. Patient-generated data is super important. So anything that patient organizations do, and this is also part of the patient experience data initiative that we are working on now. I put a link in the chat to a workshop from 2022, and later this year there will be a reflection paper. So everybody will be able to comment on that and send through all kinds of information and data.
Thank you very much. There is another comment here. Will there be a lot of physical meetings in EMA? and as ALS importuner in EMA?
Maybe I can comment on that.
Yeah.
Now, following the pandemic, of course, when everything moved online, these days most of our meetings are either virtual, or if they are face-to-face, we usually have a hybrid option. So people who cannot travel to physical meetings can usually still participate online. Maybe this was something that the question was asking.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I can see that we are close to the hour of the end of the webinar, and we would like to thank our wonderful speakers for being us. So thank you so much, Kaisa and Marco, for joining us today and reflecting on all the questions in the Q&A, and also sharing your experience and your work with EMA. And unfortunately, I think we need to wrap up now. So we would like to thank you again, both of you, for joining us today. And we also would like to thank all EUPATI Fellows for joining us and being so active in the Q&A box and asking your questions. We hope that you have enjoyed this webinar and that you have learned some valuable things related to patient engagement in the different EMA activities and EMA committees. And in EUPATI, we believe that this is a very important topic, and we will continue to follow the development, and we hopefully are going to continue also the collaboration with EMA. We also would like to remind you that you're going to receive the recording from the webinar in the next few days with the secured access. So if you have any additional questions, please reach out to us, and you can also listen to the recording in order to remind again the beautiful presentations that we had today. Also, please check the EUPATI website and social media channels for any additional information related to upcoming EUPATI events and webinars. And with all that being said, I really would like to thank our wonderful speakers today one more time, and also to thank you and to wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all.
Thank you.
Have a very good afternoon.